This is the US election show. I am Gaurie Dwivedi. Let's quickly take a look at the headlines, then we take the big stories on this show. First up, President Joe Biden is set to dial Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. First conversation since August on the cards as Israel expands its ground incursion into Lebanon and mulls response to Iran's recent ballistic missile attacks. Hurricane Milton approaches Florida as a Category 4 hurricane. It is expected to cost $20 billion in damages. This comes close on the heels of Hurricane Helen, which caused nearly $160 billion in damages in the United States. Latest analysis reveals 2024 presidential and Congress election spending will hit at least $15.9 billion, on track to become the nation's most expensive federal election ever. Kremlin backs Bob Woodward's explosive COVID claim, confirms former President Trump sent Vladimir Putin testing devices during the height of the pandemic while he was in office. Okay, it's 26 days to go and we are going to get that countdown for our viewers to know just how many days left for the world's most important election. Let's take a look at the campaigns. Where are they headed? Hurricane Milton expected to be $1 billion storm. Harris and Biden will be briefed on the administration's preparations for this hurricane, as well as the latest updates on the forecast and expected impacts. In fact, Kamala Harris will later depart New York for Las Vegas. Meanwhile, Donald Trump will spend much of his day in the key swing state of Pennsylvania discussing the economy as well as the key issue related to immigration. He will discuss wages and household prices, plus his plans in terms of elimination of taxes on tips. That has been one of the first things that Donald Trump said when he started his campaign. The Reuters Ipsos poll now says that Harris is leading Trump by a margin of just about 3%. This is reducing, in fact, Kamala Harris's lead in the polls. That's the latest on your screens. And as I said, it's 26 days to go for the world's most consequential election. The respondents in this poll that you're seeing on your screens rated the economy as being one of the most deciding factors in the upcoming election. US is the world's largest economy. It may be headed for a recession. Several people had said that is clearly weighing on the minds of these voters that have been picked in this poll. 44% of the registered voters said that Donald Trump had a better approach in terms of addressing cost of living as compared to 38% who picked Kamala Harris vice president and the Democrat presidential nominee. All right. In fact, as we speak on your screens, as I said, those numbers and they indicate that on one end, while the race is extremely close, it is also going to be a lot about the economy being at the center of it. Abortion and immigration being the other two key aspects of this election. Moving on to the first big discussion that we're having on the show, which is that Donald Trump made some claims that where he said that Gaza could in fact be better than Monaco. And Donald Trump, who's the Republican presidential nominee, he said that Gaza has the best location in the Middle East, and he mentioned and said that it could in fact be better than Monaco. Now, what we're talking about is not exactly what Donald Trump said, but more importantly, where do the two presidential nominees really stand on the Israel-Hamas war? Where is it headed? What is their larger Middle East policy? And that's exactly the big discussion we're going to have. But first take a look at this report, viewers, that tells you exactly why this is our first topic of discussion today.
Donald Trump's understanding of Middle East geography is under fresh scrutiny after he asserted that he had visited Gaza, despite there being no proof of him ever going to the conflict-ridden Palestinian area. He even suggested Gaza could be rebuilt better than Monaco, the Mediterranean haven for the super-rich. The Republican presidential candidate made the comments in an interview with conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt, who asked him whether the coastal enclave devastated by Israel's year-long military offensive, could be another Monaco if it was rebuilt the right way. Trump, a former real estate developer, claimed he had been there and described Gaza as a rough place. However, the New York Times reported that there is no record of his visiting Gaza, either during his presidency or as a businessman. A campaign official meanwhile clarified that Trump was actually referring to Israel, which he visited, along with the West Bank in 2017. Asked to provide further explanation, a Trump campaign spokesperson responded in an email statement that the former US president has been to Gaza previously, although she did not say when. Trump's comments on Gaza's potential echo those made by his son-in-law, a former advisor and Middle East envoy during his presidency, who was criticized for describing waterfront property in the territory as very valuable and suggesting that Israel remove civilians while cleaning it up. More than 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, and at least 75% of the enclave's population of 2.3 million displaced. The United Nations and World Bank have estimated the cost of rebuilding Gaza's critical infrastructure in April at $18.5 billion. Trump has repeatedly attempted to paint himself as Israel's protector during his campaign, claiming the October 7 attacks would not have happened if he were in office. But the Republican presidential nominee has also drawn accusations of anti-Semitism by saying that Jewish voters would have a lot to do with the loss if he were to suffer a defeat in next month's election. Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV World.
Okay, so Trump may have or may not have gone to Gaza. It may or may not be the Monaco, or even better than that. But what does this mean for the Middle East policy of the two candidates? That's the big discussion. Professor Andrew Latham, Jonna Blank, as well as Alex Zidane joins me on the broadcast to talk about the three aspects and essentially the three views on this discussion. Let me start with the Republican strategist first. Alex, there are conflicting reports that Donald Trump even went to Gaza. He says he did. The United Nations said he didn't. And there are some reports that indicate maybe he's talking about Israel. Maybe several people listening to this flip-flop would be a tad bit worried about Trump administration and its Middle East policy.
Well, I would say to you that no matter where President Trump visited when he was president, and he did go to the West Bank as part of a larger swing through the Middle East in 2017, former President Trump has a record on the Middle East, and it's a positive one. When you look at the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain, and later also Morocco, this was something that did a lot to promote peace within the Middle East. That continued even in the latter part of his presidency and when he left office. And if an analysis is proven to be correct, a lot of the reasons that Hamas and Iran felt that they needed to strike Israel on October 7th was because powers in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, the Sunni powers, were moving closer and closer to Israel. There were potential deals in the works to improve relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Flights from Saudi Arabia to Israel had begun. So Donald Trump's record in the Middle East is one of peace and positivity. And that's what he will be pursuing if he returns to the White House in January.
Okay, so as I said, the topic of discussion is not whether he went to Gaza or West Bank or Israel or whatever. But the fact is that what is his policy, what is his vision, and what was his record the first time he was in office. And Mr. Blank, respond to what the Republican strategist said, that at the end of the day, the accords that he spoke about did happen during Donald Trump's first tenure.
Yes, that's correct. I think we're all in agreement about whether Donald Trump is fully in line with Netanyahu's vision for the region. He is, and I don't think there's any discussion on that point. What gets left out of the equation is the 7 million Palestinians whom both Donald Trump and Netanyahu wish just didn't exist, or at least did not exist where they currently live. Could Gaza become Monaco? I doubt it, but it definitely could not become Monaco with 2 million Palestinians essentially living as war-torn refugees under a brutal military dictatorship or, a military occupation. And that's the vision for the region that both Donald Trump and Netanyahu have for the future.
Professor Andrew, where do you see those two candidates as far as their Middle East policy is concerned? Kamala Harris's campaign has been in the past scanty in terms of her vision specifically, but she's come out with some in the last couple of weeks. Where do you see that and compare that to Donald Trump's?
Well, I think rather than looking at the two candidates, we need to look at the DNA of the two parties and the way in which they are oriented towards this part of the world. And it's clear to me that the Democrats have a vision which is about, I hate to use the word appeasing, but appeasing Iran as a cornerstone of a regional peace settlement. Whereas Donald Trump and the Republicans have a very different vision, which is containing Iran through the Abraham Accords, for example. Neither of these two visions take seriously the plight of the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank. And that has been convenient for both parties, in fact, until October 7th of last year, to write them out of the equation and simply pursue their different visions of how to achieve peace and stability in the region. But October the 7th has upset that particular apple cart. And now people are going to have to, both parties in the U.S. are going to have to come to grips in a serious way with the future of the Palestinian people in a world in which neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis really welcome the prospect of a two-state solution.
Professor Andrew, then let me ask you this. This is a question I would ask you and not any of the two other panelists because they represent one of the two political views. Either of these two candidates will be president-elect in less than a month. And they will then decide what would be the United States' future policy. And where do you see that leading the world to? Because at the end of the day, that will have a very large bearing on how this entire conflict gets resolved or at least gets addressed.
Yeah, this conflict is not going to be resolved in the short to medium term. It's going to be managed. And I don't see either of these two parties being well positioned in terms of domestic politics, but in terms of the vision of the people they might bring into their administrations to even manage this conflict very well. I think we can point to the track record of Donald Trump, of whom I am not a big fan, by the way, but I think his administration really made some progress back in the day.
Okay.
It's unclear, because it's unclear about Vice President Harris's take on these things, but I think the people that she'll bring to the table do share that, I think now, outdated view that placating or appeasing Iran is the way forward.
Respond to that, Mr. Blank, that a lot of what Democrats' views, which are actually not policy, but more about an appeasement approach in terms of Iran.
Yes, I really disagree with the characterization of Democrats' approach to Iran as appeasement. That's very much not the policy that Barack Obama or President Joe Biden have put in place when in office, and it's not what Kamala Harris intends to put in place. She explicitly said in an interview just this week that she considers Iran to be the foremost adversary of the United States. Let me make clear, I disagree with a lot of Democratic positions, particularly on Gaza and the Middle East. But let's be accurate about what is being put forward. The Democratic strategy towards Iran is one of containment. The Republican strategy, at least as it appears to me, is one of unstrategic military engagement. There really isn't a strategy for a long-term dealing with Iran. Iran's nuclear program was put in a box by President Barack Obama, and Donald Trump reneged on the agreement, and now Iran is closer than ever to a nuclear weapon.
Alex, this is a very complex and complicated security calculus, but respond to what many in the Democrat camp have been saying, and they've been saying it publicly, that Donald Trump's campaign and policy doesn't get a handle on how complicated the situation is, and more importantly, how he could be, in fact, pushing Iran closer to getting a nuclear weapon.
Well, first, I will say that this is an incredibly complex situation, and that no president or presidential candidate in our lifetimes has been able to articulate a process and a policy that would fix this problem overnight. No one can do it. It's going to be a long struggle to achieve peace in that region, and peace should always be the end goal. The question is, how do we get there? I think the professor made some excellent points about Democrats' relationship with Iran. Iran is a malignant actor in this region and needs to be contained aggressively. That's what former President Trump did in office. Let's not forget killing Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Revolutionary Guard, who was the chief exporter of terrorism on the planet. He's no longer around because Donald Trump took decisive action, took out Soleimani, and the Iranian response was muted.
Quick closing comments, Professor Andrew. You're wearing the hat of being the strategist and not to any of the parties. Quick closing comments about how do you think this is panning out, and more importantly, how big an issue this is in these elections?
Well, I don't think it's a hugely consequential issue in this particular presidential election in the United States. Maybe on college campuses it is, but beyond that, not so much. I would echo some of the comments about from my colleagues that this is a situation that has to be managed in the short term and can only be resolved in the medium to long term, if it can be resolved at all. I personally think that Iran is a malignant actor in the region, that there is no deal to be done with Iran. And although I don't like the terms containment or appeasement because they are specific to a particular historical moments, Iran needs to be blunted. And its malignant influence needs to be blunted. And there is no deal to be done with Iran in the short term.
All right. Who knows? There's still 26 days to go. Maybe the regime that is facing serious issues in terms of illegitimacy and great unrest in its own country could actually be threatened significantly before these elections conclude. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking out the time and speaking to me on this show. In fact, more news coming in, and Hurricane Milton, it is now barreled towards Florida's battered Gulf Coast as an enormous Category 4 storm, triggering massive traffic jams and fuel shortages as officials ordered more than 1 million people to flee before it slams into the Tampa Bay area. Milton exploded into one of the most intense Atlantic hurricanes on record. It was forecast to make landfall late Wednesday or early Thursday, threatening a stretch of Florida's very densely populated west coast that is still reeling from the devastating Hurricane Helen that struck less than just 2 weeks ago. The storm is expected to cause another billions of dollars in damages. And let's get in Voice of America's correspondent Jessica Stone with the very latest on this. Jessica, thank you so much for speaking to me, joining us on NDTV. Let me begin by asking you in terms of the latest impact of, Hurricane Helen, and with Hurricane Milton now bearing down the American Southeast, it's in fact getting really bad in terms of the impact on that particular region in America.
That's true. And I should point out, though, that Milton has been downgraded from a Category 5 to a Category 4. That is certainly a small piece of good news for people who are, as you mentioned, by the thousands trying to evacuate, especially the Tampa Bay region, which has 3.3 million people in it. And that includes parts of Clearwater. It's on the west coast of Florida. And we're talking about a place that has not been hit directly by a hurricane in more than 100 years. So they are not used to what many Florida residents are used to, the cadence of storm season being that they invariably have to evacuate. Milton being categorized as an extremely dangerous storm, but it's also going to hit, as you mentioned, parts of the Florida coast that have already been battered by Helene on September 26th. And so right now, crews are trying to remove debris that could be used as projectiles by the gale force winds of Hurricane Milton. And for the rest of the region, the storm surge is really the problem there. They're anticipating something like 15 or 16 feet of storm surge. So that's about a third as much in meters in places like Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. And Helene, as you may recall, led to the deaths of about 200 people. So we don't know what kind of damage and what kind of death toll we could see from Milton, but it is assuredly supposed to be larger.
And in terms of damages, how much do you think this would impact the turnout for the elections? And do you think any specific arrangements will have to be made for that?
So there's two things there with a response. You've got the test of leadership for the Biden-Harris administration and the Harris ticket. She's going to be closely watched by voters to see how she responds, to see how she meets the needs of those in the path of the storm and those who have already experienced Helene and who need to be rebuilding. And then there's the other issue of how does this affect the actual physical efforts to get out an early vote and the actual polling locations. In the state of North Carolina, which was already hit by Helene, we know that this is a consequential state, and they are actually going to be moving some of these election locations for voters so that the hardest hit counties of the state will actually have additional aid to fill out their ballots.
All right, Jessica, we'll leave it there. Thanks much for speaking to me on that detail coming in as far as Hurricane. In fact, the Justice Department has now announced charges against a citizen of Afghanistan residing in Oklahoma for conspiring to conduct an election day terrorist attack in the United States on behalf of ISIS. The 27-year-old Nasir Ahmed Dwivedi attempted to provide material support to ISIS, obtained firearms and ammunition to conduct a violent attack or a terror attack on American soil. The case is now being investigated by the FBI. If convicted, Dwivedi would be charged with conspiring and attempting to provide material support to the ISIS, which carries 20 years as maximum prison sentence, and receiving a firearm to be used to commit a felony or a federal crime of terrorism, which carries a maximum prison sentence of 15 years. All right, more news coming in. Kamala Harris announced a plan to expand healthcare benefits to cover at-home senior care. The latest policy proposal is aimed at boosting the care economy and lowering down healthcare costs in America. Now, the Democrat nominee's policy would expand Medicare. Remember, that was actually brought in by Barack Obama. The federal insurance policy and plan for elderly and disabled people to cover long-term care for seniors at home for the very first time. This is the expansion that Kamala Harris is talking about. The Medicare at home, that's what the plan is being called, includes services like in-home health aides in hopes of saving American lives, the often high cost of nursing homes for aging family members. All right, more news coming in. American journalist Bob Woodward, in a new book, stated that when Donald Trump was still the president in 2020, he secretly sent Russian President Vladimir Putin a bunch of Abbott Point of Care COVID test machines for his personal use during a time when COVID tests were very scarce in America. Russia has now confirmed some of those claims that have been made by Bob Woodward. How much of an impact this would have in a very tight election contest remains to be seen. But take a look at this report that tells you the story.
A very good relationship, and I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin.
Just a few days ago, former US President Donald Trump was heard saying that he has a very good relationship with Russian President Putin. Fast forward to this week, it seems that the duo share a closer relationship than what is known to the public, according to revelations in a forthcoming book by veteran US journalist Bob Woodward. Trump left the Oval Office in 2021, but he has spoken with Putin over phone calls on as many as 7 occasions since then, according to excerpts from Woodward's book. One of the most explosive claims in the book is about Trump sending some COVID test kits, which were scarce and not easily available at the time, to Putin for personal use. Putin received the gift but urged his then US counterpart to keep this favor a secret. The Kremlin confirmed on Wednesday that Trump had sent Putin COVID test kits during the height of the pandemic, but denied the claim that the leaders had spoken by phone several times since Trump left office. However, the claims made in the book have been rejected by the Trump team, with the campaign's communication director Stephen Chung terming the book made up and untrue. The campaign director is also quoted as saying that Mr. Woodward suffers from a debilitating case of Trump derangement syndrome. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris used the opportunity to attack her opponent by saying that Trump sent COVID test kits to a murderous dictator while people struggled. Woodward's book also captures US President Joe Biden's reactions to foreign policy challenges. An excerpt from the book says that Biden used expletives to address the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after Israeli troops went into Rafah, expressing his frustration. Titled War, the book is set to be released on October 15th, with more revelations likely to follow. With Vishal Vivek, Bureau Report, NDTV.
All right, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of US Election Watch. But as we wrap things up, take a look at Democrat presidential candidate Kamala Harris and her beer diplomacy that's breaking the internet.